Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. High in the Sierra, Jackson Hale lived far from neighbors and even farther from trouble, or so he thought. When a ruthless HOA arrived with forged papers, cameras, and a plan to steal his land, Hale's quiet mountain life turned into a high-stakes fight for survival and justice. The mountains have their own kind of silence. Not the dead quiet of a padded room, but a layered hush. Wind threading through the pines, a raven croaking somewhere down in the draw, the creak of old wood settling in the cold morning air. I was standing out by my gate, wrench in one hand, a bucket of bolts at my feet, tightening the sagging hinge where the snowplow had clipped it last winter. My hound, Rowan, was sprawled in a patch of sun, the only creature in a 50-mile radius with less ambition than me that morning. Over the past half year, my mailbox had turned into a repository for HOA fever dreams. Fancy envelopes with the Aspen Ridge Valley logo embossed like they thought that would make them official. Inside, orders to repaint my cabin in approved earth tones, tear down my woodshed, landscape my yard, and grant communal access to my spring. Every one of those letters got stamped with the same red ink I'd had made special, not a member, and sent right back. That didn't stop them. Twice, I'd caught so-called inspectors snapping photos from the road. One of them even stepped over my fence line to get a better shot until I reminded him loudly about California Penal Code 602. He left in a hurry. That morning, as I tightened the last bolt, I heard it, an engine straining on the grade below, tires chewing gravel. A black SUV came into view, crawling up my drive, shiny enough to flash sunlight into my eyes. On the side, someone had slapped the Aspen Ridge Valley HOA logo, like a police decal you buy online to feel important. 3 men inside, 2 in matching dark jackets, 1 in a white shirt and tie despite the chill. There was even a little amber light bar on the roof, blinking away like they thought they were serving warrants. Rowan's ears pricked up. Mine did too, though for different reasons. I walked to the cabin, stepped inside, and took my Ithaca from the rack by the door. It's older than I am, walnut stock worn smooth, bluing gone to a soft patina, but the action still feels like a bank vault. I carried it out onto the porch, cradled low, muzzle toward the ground. They pulled up short of the gate, smart, but started walking toward me with the kind of confidence that only comes from not understanding where you are. The one in the tie was already talking, voice loud and rehearsed, like he'd practiced in front of a mirror. Something about delinquent assessments totaling $48,000 and immediate forfeiture of property. He kept glancing at a sheet in his folder, stumbling over my APN number like it was a foreign language. I let him get within 5 paces of my fence, then shifted the shotgun just enough to make sure he noticed. Another step onto my land, I said, not raising my voice, and you'll be leaving without your knees. That stopped him cold. The other 2 looked at each other, then at the dirt under their boots, then back at me. My face didn't change, and neither did my stance. Rowan, sensing the shift, got up and moved closer to my side, not growling, just watching. The tie man's lips worked, but whatever he was about to say died when I took half a step forward. They started backing up, slow at first, then faster, until the taller one nearly tripped over the tie man's heels. In their retreat, the folder slipped from someone's hands and hit the dirt just inside the gate. No one made a move to pick it up. They piled back into the SUV, doors slamming like gunshots, tires spitting gravel as they made a 3-point turn and barreled back down the road, the blinking light bar still pathetically spinning. I waited until the sound of the engine was gone before I bent to pick up the folder. The front page was a cheap knockoff of a legal notice, full of threats and bad formatting. I took out my phone, snapped photos of the folder, the pages, the boot prints in the dust, and the tire tracks leading away. I even shot a short video of the whole scene, reading off the date and time for good measure. Inside, I put the shotgun back on its hooks and called the county sheriff's office, gave the dispatcher the location, the sequence of events, and the SUV's plate number. She asked if anyone had crossed my fence line. I told her they'd kept just shy of it this time, and left behind what looked like fraudulent papers. She gave me a case number and said a patrol would swing through the area. I thanked her, hung up, and stood by the window, watching the dust settle over the road. In these mountains, silence always comes back, but sometimes it carries a different weight. 2 days later, I was standing in line at the post office in town buying dog food and coffee filters along with a few other things I can't get up in the hills when the clerk slid a thick cream-colored envelope across the counter. Certified mail. The return address wasn't a surprise, Aspen Ridge Valley HOA, but the sender line had a twist. Legal Services Division. I signed, walked out to the bench under the flagpole, and tore it open. Inside was a formal summons dressed up in legalese that didn't hide the stink. They were accusing me of threats with a deadly weapon, obstruction of lawful seizure, and aggression toward authorized representatives. Court date already set, less than 3 weeks away. Tucked behind it was a glossy press release clearly meant for the media. I didn't have to wonder long who got it. By the time I got home, my phone was lighting up with messages from people who'd seen the local news. On screen, there was Karen Drummond herself, standing in front of the HOA clubhouse in a tailored suit the color of wet cement. Her voice had that false sweetness that never survives more than 30 seconds. "We have a dangerous armed recluse up there in the hills," she told the camera. "He's been threatening our community, endangering lives, and refusing to abide by the rules we all live by." Behind her, a printout of a blurry telephoto shot of my cabin flapped on an easel like some kind of wanted poster. By the time I shut the TV off, the HOA's online echo chamber was in full swing. On their Facebook group, people I'd never met were calling me a gun nut squatter and suggesting I be removed for safety. One particularly creative commenter suggested burning me out like a wasp nest. Rowan just thumped his tail against the floor, oblivious to public opinion. That afternoon, a silver sedan with a magnetic process server sign rolled up to my gate. A man in a windbreaker stepped out, holding a sealed envelope like it might bite him. "Jackson Hale," he called. I confirmed. He handed it over without crossing the fence and drove off without a word. This packet was thicker, civil complaint complete with exhibits that included the confiscation notice they'd dropped in my dirt. I sat at my desk, lit the lamp, and started a call to the only lawyer I'd trust with something like this, Riley Shaw. Riley and I had run down bail jumpers together back in the day, before he traded his badge for a bar card. He answered on the second ring, and I laid it all out, from the SUV's arrival to the news segment. His laugh was short and humorless. "Don't throw anything out," he said. "Bag the envelope, the dropped folder, every letter they've ever sent you. Get me photos of your parcel map and the assessor's records. I want the APN, the legal description, and the county's zoning classification within an hour." I had everything scanned and in a shared folder. The county records clearly showed my land, parcel highlighted in clean yellow, sitting well outside the HOA's mapped boundary. No easements, no covenants, nothing tying me to them. Riley flagged the confiscation notice right away. "Notary stamps off," he said. "Wrong format for this county, and the signature's pixelated. Could be a print and paste job." We went through my security cam archives. I pulled up the morning in question, grainy but clear enough to see the HOA logo on the SUV, the men approaching, stopping at the fence, and retreating in a hurry. Time stamps matched the photos I'd taken on my phone. My trail cameras along the lower switchback caught them leaving the property. License plate in full view. Riley's next instruction was simple. Call the sheriff's office again. Give them my name and tell them I'm representing you. Ask for the case number from your first report and make sure it's noted that you've preserved all physical and digital evidence. I'll draft a notice to the HOA's counsel to preserve everything on their end. Emails, body cam footage, phone records. They erase so much as a text. It's spoliation. As the sun dropped behind the ridge, I sent him the last file. The screen's glow lit up my desk, the confiscation notice sitting there like a bad joke. They thought they could paint me into a corner with TV sound bites and trumped-up charges. They'd picked the wrong wall to back me up against. Riley didn't waste time. The next morning, I was in his small but organized office in town, the kind of place where every surface had a neat stack of files and the coffee pot never seemed to be off. He'd already drafted the counterattack, 2 thick packets of paper laid out like weapons. One was a counterclaim, trespass, attempted fraud, slander of title, abuse of process, and defamation. The other was a motion for a temporary restraining order to keep anyone from the HOA, including their contractors, off my property. We went through the wording line by line. Riley was careful. No dramatics, just plain, provable facts. My land was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. They'd entered without permission. They'd presented a forged legal document in an attempt to claim ownership. They'd broadcast false accusations to the public. He stapled my photos, the security cam stills, and copies of every stamped "not a member" letter as exhibits. I signed where he pointed. By mid-morning, Riley was on the phone with the county clerk's office, filing both documents electronically and requesting expedited hearings. "Now we make them bleed time and money," he said, hanging up. He had me sign a set of subpoenas for the HOA's internal communications, the body cam footage from the men who came to my gate, and the complete notary log from whoever stamped that confiscation notice. He also wanted the HOA's correspondence with their property management company and any contractors tied to community improvements near my land. From there, we drove to the sheriff's substation. Captain Warren met us in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I laid out the timeline again, this time with printed photos and a USB drive containing the video. Warren flipped through the paperwork, his expression tightening when he saw the forgery. "We'll add this to the existing case file," he said, "and I'll make sure patrol swings through your area more often for the next few weeks." Back at the cabin that afternoon, I went into overdrive. The lower drive got two new "No Trespassing" PC602 signs bolted to treated posts. I added a motion-activated camera halfway up the switchback, angled to catch plates and faces. Inside, I moved my evidence into a locking steel cabinet in the workshop and duplicated everything to an encrypted drive Riley would keep off-site. It was just before sundown when I got the call that shifted the ground a little. The voice on the other end was careful, almost whispering. "Mr. Hale, my name's Ellen Pack. I work in admin for the HOA's management company. I saw what happened with that notice they tried to serve you." She hesitated. "I think you should know, there's a plan. They call it the Inclusion Project. It's about pulling your land into the HOA map, whether you agree or not. They've done it before." I kept my voice even. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen the emails. They knew you weren't a member. They wanted to get a default judgment by filing on a Friday and getting it rubber-stamped Monday before you could respond. Then they'd record it with the county and say you were part of the community all along." She paused again. "I can get you those emails, but I need protection. If they find out, I'm done." Riley was already scribbling notes on a pad as I relayed the conversation over speakerphone. He told her he'd draw up a formal letter offering to represent her for the purpose of providing evidence, along with a request for protective measures if this went to court. She agreed to meet him in person, away from the HOA offices, in 2 days' time. After we hung up, I stepped out onto the porch. The ridge was glowing with the last light, the air crisp enough to carry sound for miles. Somewhere down in the valley, Karen and her board thought they were running the table. What they didn't know was that one of their own had just cut the legs out from under it. 2 days later, Riley met Ellen in the back corner of a coffee shop 20 miles from the HOA offices. I sat at a table nearby, close enough to watch the door, but far enough to keep from spooking her. She was mid-30s, neat blazer, hair pulled into a bun so tight it probably hurt. She looked like someone used to keeping things tidy, paperwork, schedules, maybe whole lives. Her eyes, though, kept flicking toward the door until Riley slid the non-disclosure agreement and representation letter across the table. Once she signed, her hands didn't stop moving. She dug into a tote bag and came out with a flash drive in a cheap plastic case. Riley asked the obvious question. "Everything on here is relevant to the Hale matter." She nodded. Emails between board members and management. Meeting minutes that weren't supposed to be public. Draft maps showing your parcel as pending inclusion. And a schedule. File suit Friday. Get default judgment Monday. Submit amended HOA map to the county recorder Tuesday. It's literally written down. Back in Riley's office, we cracked the drive. The emails were blunt. One from Karen. "Once Hale's in, we can green-light the Ridge Villas plan. Summit Creeks will cover legal if we move fast." Another from the HOA's treasurer. "Norton, the notary, is solid. Don't worry about the stamp. We just need the papers to look official long enough." Attached was a PDF of a parcel map with my APN circled in red, dated only a week before the confiscation notice landed in my dirt. Riley leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his teeth. "This isn't just civil harassment. We've got a forged notary act, a conspiracy to defraud, and possible bribery if Summit's footing bills for court actions that benefit them directly." He pulled up the campaign contribution database on his second monitor. Sure enough, Summit Creek's development had cut a check for $5,000 to Judge Albright's re-election fund 6 months ago. the same judge who'd been assigned my case. "You conflict of interest," Riley muttered, already drafting a motion for judicial recusal and a change of venue. By the time the sun was down, we had it filed, citing Ellen's evidence, the campaign contribution, and a need for a fair hearing in a neighboring county. The next morning, the local paper ran a story titled "Questions Raised Over HOA Land Expansion Practices," complete with a cropped screenshot of Karen's email about the Ridge Villas plan. They hadn't named me yet, but it was obvious enough for anyone who knew the area. Karen went on a talk radio show that afternoon and tried to spin it as visionary community growth, but the audio clip of her saying, "Don't worry about the stamp," was already circulating online. 2 days later, we were in a new courtroom, a county over. The judge, a calm-eyed woman with a reputation for patience and precision, granted the recusal without blinking. She also extended my temporary restraining order against the HOA and expanded it to include any contractors working for them. Riley slipped in another motion, anti-SLAPP, arguing that their public statements about me were defamatory attempts to silence my lawful defense of my property. The judge set a hearing date for that, too. By the end of the week, Ellen's documents were in the hands of the district attorney's office. They'd requested the notary's full log and announced they were reviewing matters related to potential document fraud. Karen's smile on the news looked tighter every night. She was still talking about community standards, but the words didn't land the same when half the county had seen her blueprint for stealing land. The following week felt like running a trapline. You never knew what you'd find until you checked. Every morning brought a new ripple. The district attorney's office confirmed they'd subpoenaed the notary, Norton, for a deposition. Word was he'd already lawyered up. Riley told me that was usually a sign someone knew the ceiling was about to fall in. Meanwhile, the HOA board was cracking. Ellen fed us quiet updates. 2 members had resigned after the newspaper printed a follow-up piece outlining possible irregularities in HOA land acquisitions. The article didn't name names, but the resignations told their own story. Karen tried to fill the vacancies with loyalists, but the state HOA regulatory board had already sent her a notice freezing any new appointments until the investigation wrapped. We kept stacking the legal ammo. Riley filed a discovery request for the HOA's insurance policies. "If we win, their insurer might have to cut you a check," he said. "And if the fraud's bad enough, the insurer might drop them altogether." We also served Summit Creek's development with subpoenas for their financials relating to the Ridge Villas project. The court clerk told Riley that the moment Summit's name hit the record, 3 different local reporters requested copies of our filings. One afternoon, I was in the shed cleaning a Winchester 1897 for a client when Rowan barked twice, a low, deliberate sound that meant, "We've got company." I stepped out to see a county sheriff's SUV easing up the switchback. Deputy Marquez got out, hand resting easy on his belt. "Hale, just a heads up. Someone in town tried to file a complaint saying you threatened them at gunpoint again. Only problem is, they listed the date as yesterday afternoon, and we've got gas station camera footage of you and Bishop at that time." A fake complaint, sloppy and desperate. Riley called it another nail in their credibility. We added it to the retaliation evidence pile. The next blow came from the DA's office. They'd secured a warrant to search the HOA's offices for original copies of the confiscation notice and related communications. The raid happened on a Thursday morning. By noon, Ellen texted me a single line. They took the whole server. Karen tried damage control the next day with a press conference in front of the HOA clubhouse. She wore a bright scarf and that same tight smile, claiming baseless attacks were hurting the community. A reporter asked her point blank about the notary's forged stamp. She pivoted, said she wasn't a technical person, and walked away without answering. That clip ran on repeat all weekend. Riley and I prepped for the next hearing like it was a prize fight. He wanted to lead with the forged document, follow with the internal emails, then drop the campaign contribution angle as the closer. "You build pressure," he said. So by the time the judge looks up, they're already picturing the verdict. That night, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, I could see the faint glow from the valley below. Somewhere down there, Karen was learning what it felt like when the people you thought you controlled started slipping out from under you. The difference was, I wasn't just slipping, I was pushing back hard enough to leave marks. The courthouse in the neighboring county had that old American West feel. Brick facade, wide wooden steps, and a flag out front that snapped in the wind like it had been doing the job since the Eisenhower administration. Riley and I arrived early, both of us in pressed shirts, no tie for me. The last thing I wanted was to look like I was trying too hard. Karen was already there, flanked by 2 suits and a young guy who kept checking his phone. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the tension spike in the hallway like a storm front rolling through. Inside, the judge wasted no time. This was the hearing on our counterclaims and the anti-SLAPP motion. Riley led with the forged document, projecting the confiscation notice on the courtroom screen. He pointed out the notary stamp, then produced the DA's letter confirming that Norton had admitted under oath that the stamp was applied without the required identification and without my presence. You could almost hear the oxygen leave the HOA's table. Next came Ellen's emails. Riley walked the judge through the Inclusion Project plan, highlighting the part about filing suit on a Friday to catch me off guard. He showed the map with my APN circled in red, the one labeled Pending Inclusion. When Karen's attorney tried to object, the judge overruled him with a flat, "This goes to motive." Then Riley dropped the campaign contribution. He didn't accuse outright, just laid the facts in a straight line. Summit Creek's development pays $5,000 to Judge Albright's campaign. 6 months later, the HOA files a land seizure case that would directly benefit Summit. "Your Honor," Riley said, "we're not asking you to rule on the ethics of that today. We're just showing the pattern, and patterns matter." Karen's team looked like they'd been caught with their hands in a cookie jar, but they still tried to fight. Their attorney argued that the men who came to my cabin were lawful agents executing a legitimate property action. Riley countered by replaying my security footage the moment the lead guy stepped over my fence line, the sound of him saying, "Let's just read it quick and get out." The judge leaned forward at that. After an hour, the ruling came down like a hammer. The anti-SLAPP motion was granted in part, meaning the defamation claims against me were dismissed immediately. The counterclaims for trespass, fraud, and abuse of process would proceed to trial. The judge also ordered the HOA to produce every piece of communication regarding my property in the past 2 years and slap them with a protective order preventing them from contacting me directly. Outside, the press was waiting. Microphones appeared from nowhere. Karen breezed past them with a tight, "No comment," but I stopped long enough to say, "I'm just here to protect what's mine. The law's on my side and the truth's catching up." It wasn't a line I'd rehearsed. It just came out that way. Judging by the next day's headlines, it landed well. That night, Riley and I sat at my kitchen table going through the next steps. The DA was moving ahead with potential charges against Norton and other parties to be determined. Ellen's evidence was now part of that criminal file, and she'd been formally listed as a cooperating witness. Riley wanted to push for depositions of the remaining HOA board members as soon as possible, while the pressure was still fresh. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. "No caller ID." I answered, and a man's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Hale, you don't know me, but I've done work for Summit Creeks. They're talking about making this problem disappear. Not in court. You understand." The line went dead before I could say a word. I sat there, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence, and felt that cold, familiar shift, the one I used to get back when bounty work went sideways. This was no longer just legal gamesmanship. They were hinting at something else entirely, and if that was the next card they wanted to play, they'd better be ready for how I was going to answer. I didn't sleep much that night. The voice on the phone kept replaying in my head, every word deliberate, like he wanted me to know he wasn't bluffing. At first light, I walked the perimeter of my land with Rowan trotting ahead, checking every trail, every fence post. Nothing unusual, no tire tracks, no broken wire, but the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the woods themselves were waiting. Riley didn't like the call one bit. When I told him, he set his coffee down and said, "We treat this as a credible threat. Period." He contacted Deputy Marquise, who came by within the hour. We filed a formal report, noting that the caller referenced Summit Creeks directly. Marquez promised to flag my property for extra patrols, though he admitted the remoteness made it more symbolic than practical. Still, having it on record mattered. By midday, Riley had quietly reached out to a couple of his old contacts, guys from his private investigation days, about digging into Summit Creek's current contractors. He wanted to know who had both the motive and the guts to drive up here. In the meantime, I took my own precautions: fresh batteries in the trail cams, extra locks on the shed and the cabin doors, and the Ithaca, loaded but hidden within arm's reach, in the living room. That afternoon, Ellen sent over another batch of files she'd recovered before leaving the HOA. This time, personal notes Karen had kept on problem owners. My name topped the list, followed by comments like hostile, isolated, and suspected. Firearms. She'd even drawn a little sketch of my property layout, complete with X marks where she thought my cameras were. The fact she knew about some of them, but not all, told me I'd been right to keep the newer ones off obvious sightlines. The DA's office called just before dusk. They'd officially charged Norton with felony forgery and were reviewing potential conspiracy counts involving HOA officials. The investigator on the case asked if I'd be willing to testify about the confiscation notice and the morning it was delivered. I agreed, though I made it clear I wouldn't be intimidated off the stand by thinly veiled threats. That night, I was on the porch again when a pair of headlights appeared far down the switchback road. They paused for a long minute before moving on, slow enough that I could see the outline of a dark SUV. No plates on the front, which was legal in California but didn't make me feel any better. I watched until the glow vanished, then made a note of the time and direction. The next morning, Riley forwarded me an email from one of his contacts, a screenshot of an internal Summit Creek's message thread. It was short, 2 lines, but clear enough. Hail problem, handle before trial date. Kay will cover it. No full names, no dates, but the implication was enough to make my jaw tighten. We decided to go on offense. Riley drafted a motion for a protective order, not just against the HOA, but naming Summit Creeks and any agents, contractors, or representatives thereof. It was aggressive, maybe even overreaching, but it would force them to answer under oath, whether they'd made contact with me outside the legal process. On the 3rd day after the call, the local paper ran another front-page story. HOA fraud case expands to include developer Summit Creeks. The article referenced unconfirmed reports of witness intimidation, and while my name wasn't mentioned, anyone following the saga could put the pieces together. Karen's photo accompanied the story. Her expression caught mid-blink, like she'd just realized the camera was closer than she thought. By the time evening came, the air in the valley had that still, waiting quality again. I knew the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was about to shift into a new, sharper phase. But if they thought fear was going to drive me off my land, they were reading the wrong man entirely. The morning of the trial dawned cold and brittle, the kind of Sierra air that cut straight through to your lungs. I was up before first light, moving slow but deliberate. Coffee, boots, jacket, the Ithaca locked away in the gun safe. This day wasn't about firearms. It was about finishing what they started. Riley pulled up just after 6, his sedan already dusted in frost. He looked sharp, in a dark suit, and that wolfish grin he got when the cards were in our favor. The courthouse lobby was buzzing by the time we arrived. Reporters milled around, their cameras like vultures circling for the first drop of blood. Across the hall, Karen stood with her legal team, her scarf a glaring slash of red against the beige walls. The smugness she'd worn in earlier hearings was gone, replaced by tightness around the eyes. Norton, the disgraced notary, was conspicuously absent. Word was he'd cut a deal with the DA and wouldn't be testifying for the defense. When the judge entered, the room settled into that electric hush that only happens before a verdict. But first, there was testimony. Riley called me to the stand early. I told the story straight, how the black SUV had come up the road, how the men crossed my fence line without permission, how they'd read from forged papers claiming a debt I never owed. I didn't embellish. The footage spoke louder than I ever could, and Riley played it twice for the court. Next came Ellen. Calm, steady, she detailed the inclusion project, the internal pressure to target my property, and the instructions from Karen to create urgency by serving me in person. She didn't flinch when Karen's attorney tried to paint her as a disgruntled ex-member. I left because I wasn't going to be part of a crime, she said, and let the silence hang heavy. The DA's investigator followed, laying out the chain of evidence that proved the notice was a forgery, matching ink analysis, mismatched signature strokes, and Norton's recorded admission. Then came the kicker, a series of emails between Summit Creeks and HOA officials discussing timelines and coordination for the land grab. One line, projected for all to see, read, "Once hail's out, we can break ground before winter." Karen's turn on the stand was a disaster. She denied knowledge of the forgery, claimed she'd relied on her team, but couldn't explain why her personal email contained instructions to proceed regardless of resistance. When Riley asked if she'd ever authorized contact with third parties to resolve the hail problem, she froze just long enough for the judge to intervene, instructing her to answer. She said no, but the hesitation was the kind you can't unsee. By closing arguments, the air was thick with inevitability. Riley wove the narrative together: private land, no HOA jurisdiction, a manufactured debt, a forged notice, a coordinated attempt to seize property, and intimidation when the plan failed. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The judge took a recess before delivering the verdict. When she returned, her tone was steady, almost surgical. The court found in my favor on all counts: trespass, fraud, abuse of process, and conspiracy. The HOA was ordered to pay full damages and my legal costs. Karen and 2 board members were referred to the DA for criminal prosecution. Summit Creeks was barred from any development activity on my land or adjacent parcels for the next 10 years. It was over, at least in the courtroom. Outside, the press swarmed again, but this time Karen didn't show. Riley gave them the legal sound bites, and I kept it simple. I said I'd defend my land. Today, the court agreed I had the right. Back at the cabin that evening, I stood where the black SUV had stopped months earlier. The air was sharp, the sky clear, and for the first time in a long while, the ridge felt like mine again. I walked down to the old fence, set a small metal sign in the earth, and tightened the bolts until it gleamed in the fading light. It read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." And if the day ever came when someone thought about testing it again, well, they'd find I hadn't forgotten how to defend what was mine.